Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, issued a statement in tribute to his mother. He said, "Your Majesty, it has been an honour and privilege to serve you."
Buckingham Palace is in shock after Prince Andrew reportedly read the late Queen's final will. For years, people wondered what she left behind and who would get her fortune. Now, surprising details are coming out, and the royal family is not happy. Some say her will could change everything, and others fear it may cause problems between King Charles and Prince William. Did the Queen's final wishes bring trouble? And what does this mean for the future of the monarchy? Join us as we uncover the details of the late Queen Elizabeth's final will and the truth behind this royal mystery. The will that shook Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace was silent, the kind of silence that fills a room when a life-changing moment is about to happen. And every royal family member sat tensely, with their eyes fixed on the envelope resting on the table. Inside it was the last will of Queen Elizabeth II, a document that could change everything. And with a reign lasting for 70 years, her wealth and possessions were immense.
This great hall has provided me with some of the most memorable events in my life.
But this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, power, and the very future of the monarchy. Now everything was about to be revealed. And of all people, Prince Andrew stood at the center of it all. He was the one to open the will and read it aloud.
There is no good time to talk about all things associated.
However, this choice surprised many. Shouldn't King Charles be the one to do it? Or perhaps Princess Anne, because of her unwavering duty?
My experience from my abilities to visit, it is well worth the effort of what was achieved.
Keep watching to find out. Prince Andrew stood at the center of the room, holding the sealed envelope that contained his mother's final words. He was not the person anyone expected to read it, yet here he was. The room was so quiet that even the sound of his breathing felt loud. He looked around, seeing the anticipation in everyone's eyes. Charles was sitting stiffly with his hands clasped together. Anne kept her expression calm, but the slight movement of her fingers tapping against the armrest gave away her nerves. William and Kate sat close together, their faces unreadable. Harry was there too, but his expression was harder to read.
But if you do it for other members of the family, there becomes a point when silence is betrayal.
Andrew took a deep breath because he knew there was no turning back. He slid his finger under the wax seal, breaking it open. The sound was small, but it felt like a crack of thunder in the stillness of the room. He unfolded the paper, his hands slightly shaking as he began to read. "This is my last will and testament." The words hung in the air for a moment as everyone absorbed them. Some faces remained neutral, but others shifted. There was relief in some eyes, and anxiety in others. Andrew continued reading, and as he did, the Queen's message became plain. She started with gratitude, thanking her family for their dedication to the monarchy, but it did not take long before things became more personal. She addressed Charles first. "To my dear son Charles," Andrew read aloud. The words were formal, yet something about them felt distant. The Queen had entrusted Charles with Windsor Castle, which was expected. He had been prepared for this role all his life, so there were no surprises there. Charles remained still, though his jaw tightened slightly. Andrew could tell that his brother was waiting for something more.
That was the key element in this, what he was doing.
But it didn't come. Then Andrew moved on to Anne. The Queen had acknowledged her strength and loyalty, but there was nothing shocking in her words. Anne's face barely changed because she was never one for dramatic reactions.
I would necessarily have what we do, we hope, contributes to the monarchy and the way in which...
Then the unexpected part came. The Queen had made a decision that was unlike anything seen before in the royal family. Instead of following the long-standing tradition of passing down Balmoral estate to a single heir, she had chosen a different path. Balmoral, a place deeply personal to the Queen, would belong to the entire family rather than just one person. This decision broke away from the way royal estates had always been handled. Normally, such properties were inherited by a single heir, reinforcing the idea of direct succession and clear ownership. However, the Queen had deliberately changed the rules, leaving everyone in the room stunned. However, the silence that followed was not just about surprise, it was about understanding the deeper meaning behind her choice. Balmoral was not just any estate. It was the Queen's personal retreat, a place she loved dearly and where she spent some of her most cherished moments. By choosing to share it among the entire family, she was sending a message that went beyond property ownership. This was about more than just land or tradition. It was about unity. For decades, Balmoral had been a sanctuary for the royal family, a place where they could escape the public eye and simply be together. It was where they celebrated, mourned, and created memories away from the pressures of royal life. By ensuring that the estate remained accessible to everyone, the Queen was making sure that Balmoral would continue to serve as a place of connection for generations to come. This decision forced the family to stay linked, no matter how far apart their personal lives and choices took them. Some had seen this as an attempt to maintain control even in her absence, but it was clear that her intentions were rooted in something much deeper. The Queen had witnessed firsthand how distance, disagreements, and personal ambitions had created divisions within the family. She had seen members drift apart, with tensions often making headlines and private disputes spilling into the public eye. By keeping Balmoral as a shared space, she was encouraging them to remain a family, despite their differences. This choice also symbolized something greater than just family unity. It reflected her understanding that the monarchy's strength came not from titles or properties, but from relationships. A divided royal family would only weaken the institution she had spent her life upholding. By tying them together in this way, she was ensuring that, at the very least, they would always have a reason to come back to one another. The room remained heavy with thought as they heard this. Many saw this decision as a challenge, while others may have understood it as an opportunity. Either way, it was undeniable that the Queen had changed the future of Balmoral, and in doing so, had made a final, powerful statement about the importance of family.
Come together in common cause, there is always room for hope.
However, as Andrew moved on, Catherine received something significant as well. The Queen had left her the Vladimir tiara, one of the most valuable pieces in the royal collection. It was a symbol of grace and history, and now it was in Catherine's hands. Her expression did not change much, but Andrew noticed the slight flicker in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. Then, Andrew read something that made the room change again. The Queen had left something for Harry. It was unexpected because after everything that had happened, most people assumed he would be left out. Instead, she had given him something with meaning. Andrew paused for a moment before reading it out loud. To my grandson Harry, I leave the silver box that belonged to my father, King George VI. This box carried the letters of a king, words that held power and history, reminding them that even in distance, one is never truly separated from their family. However, the air in the room changed immediately after the message was read out loud by Andrew. William shifted slightly in his seat, glancing at Harry, but Harry's face remained unreadable. Was this an offering of peace, or was it a message to remind him of what he had walked away from? No one could tell. Andrew continued reading, but the tension in the room had already taken a new shape. The Queen had done what she could to lay out a plan, but it was not a simple one. Her decisions were plain, yet they left so many questions behind.
But I'm also struck by something that hasn't changed. It was a powerful reclaiming of the ground.
What did this all mean for the family moving forward? As Andrew reached the end of the will, he felt the weight of the moment. His mother's words had been spoken, but the impact of them had only just begun. Everyone in the room was processing what they had just heard. The inheritance was not just about wealth. It was about responsibility, about expectations, and about power. But there was still more to come, and what Andrew revealed next shook the very foundation of Buckingham Palace. The will's shocking twist. The room remained heavy with silence as Andrew continued. The Queen's words carried more weight than anyone had expected. This wasn't just about who inherited what. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. King Charles sat still, his hands folded, but his face was tense. He had spent his whole life preparing for the crown. Yet now, his mother's final decisions were putting everything into question. Andrew cleared his throat and continued reading. The next name mentioned in the will was Princess Anne. As the Queen's only daughter, everyone expected she would receive something not quite significant. The Queen had always spoken highly of her, and many believed she saw her as a pillar of strength in the royal family. Andrew read aloud, "To my beloved daughter Anne, I leave Sandringham Estate." Anne's expression remained calm, but a hint of surprise flickered in her eyes. Sandringham was one of the Queen's most treasured properties. It was where the royal family gathered for Christmas every year. But before anyone could dwell on that, Andrew moved on to the next part. "To my youngest son, Edward, I leave Bagshot Park, with the hope that he continues his quiet but essential work for the crown." Prince Edward had always been in the background, never stirring controversy. He had remained loyal, taking on more royal duties in recent years. But this gift was more than just a residence. It was a message. The Queen wanted him to play a bigger role in the monarchy's future. But then something unexpected happened. Andrew, who stood at the head of the room, holding the document in his hands, had already gone through the first part. But there was still more. And as he continued reading,
to refer to the events that have taken place in the last few weeks.
Everyone in the room felt a growing tension. The first part had already shaken them, yet this next part was even more surprising. King Charles sat stiffly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. His expression was unreadable, but his tightened jaw and the way he tapped his fingers on the wood gave away his frustration. He wasn't happy with what he had heard so far.
And I know that my eldest will now demonstrate his buff credentials.
He had expected control. He had expected to be the one making all the decisions, yet it seemed the Queen had set things in motion that he hadn't planned for. He had inherited Windsor, but was that enough? The Queen had chosen to split Balmoral, and that alone had changed everything. Now, what else was coming? Anne, who was sitting beside him, was calm and composed, but her posture had changed.
But it was intriguing to note how people, there was the word they kept using here, pivoted.
She wasn't someone who showed much emotion, but she had been surprised when she was given Sandringham. She had spent her entire life dedicated to the royal family, yet she had never expected something so significant. It wasn't just a property, it was a statement and a responsibility.
Underpins what you do, because they are the evidence which makes it work.
William, who sat beside Catherine, had a neutral face, but his eyes were sharp. He was trying to process everything, but he also knew this wasn't just about him. This was about the future of his children too. He glanced at Catherine, and she remained still, absorbing every word, knowing that whatever came next would shape their family's destiny. Andrew took a deep breath and turned the page. Then he read out the next part, and it was about Harry again. "I want Harry to take good care of the ceremonial sword of King George VI." The room fell silent. It was like a bomb had dropped. Harry hadn't been in the family's inner circle for a long time.
And a large part of it for the family, but also the British press and numerous other people, was like,
He had chosen to leave, yet here he was, still being included. The ceremonial sword was no ordinary object. It wasn't just a decoration. It was a symbol of strength, history, and royal duty. It represented the values that had shaped the monarchy for generations. And now, the Queen had given it to Harry. William's face hardened. He had tried to remain composed throughout the reading, but this was too much. His hands clenched into fists, and he struggled to hide his anger. Harry had walked away. He had abandoned his royal duties, yet he was still being given something so meaningful. William couldn't understand it. Charles was just as unsettled as his son William. His usual composed demeanor was breaking. The sword was a sign of trust, a recognition of duty. But Harry had turned his back on that duty. Was giving him the silver box not enough? Why would the Queen give him something so important? Anne, however, remained still. She had seen many conflicts in the family over the years, and she knew better than to react, but even she couldn't deny the weight of this decision. The sword was more than just a gift. It was a message, and Andrew didn't dwell on it for too long as he continued reading, ignoring the whispers in the room. "To my great-grandchildren, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, I leave not only the treasures of our family, but also the knowledge I have gained over the years." Catherine took a deep breath. She had been waiting for this moment. She knew the Queen had always been fond of George and Charlotte. But this wasn't just about gifts only, but about passing on a legacy. The Queen wasn't just leaving them material things. She was leaving them wisdom, guidance, and expectations. She was making it clear that they had roles to play in the future of the monarchy. This was bigger than the titles or estates. It was about shaping the next generation. William felt the weight of it too.
Worried, or her legacy to be that, William or Harry.
He wasn't just raising his children. He was preparing them for something much bigger. The monarchy's survival depended on them, and the Queen had made sure they understood that. Andrew turned another page. To my great-grandson, Prince Louis, I have left a letter written by hand. A letter for you to learn from, to guide you as you grow. It was a simple letter, yet it carried so much meaning. Louis was still young, but the Queen had thought about him too. She knew that one day he would have questions. One day he would need guidance. And she had left something just for him. Catherine felt a lump in her throat. The Queen had always been thoughtful, but this letter was something personal. It was something Louis would one day hold in his hands, knowing that his great-grandmother had written it just for him. The room remained silent. Everyone was still processing what they had just heard, but Andrew wasn't finished. Andrew looked around the room before turning the final page. There was still one last thing. To my son, King Charles, I leave my private collection of letters, diaries, and personal writings. These are not for the public. These are for you to understand, to reflect, and to remember. Charles blinked. He hadn't expected this.
And they see their future being totally destroyed.
The Queen had left him most of her private thoughts, the words she had never shared with anyone else. These writings held her fears, her hopes, and her reflections on the monarchy. They were the deepest part of her, and now they belonged to him. Charles swallowed hard. He had spent his entire life preparing for this role. He had waited decades to become king, but now, as he sat there holding on to these words, he realized something. His mother had always known more than she let on. She had been guiding him, shaping him, preparing him for this moment. And now, even in her absence, she was still leading him. The room remained quiet, and everyone was lost in their thoughts. The Queen's will had done more than just divide her possessions. It had revealed her final decisions. It showed her faith in certain people and her doubts in others. It had left some feeling honored and others feeling betrayed. But the reading wasn't over yet. Andrew's voice broke the silence. There is one last part of the will, and that was when the real shock came. The weight of legacy. As Andrew finished reading the last part of the will, the room was engulfed in a profound stillness. The weight of the Queen's final words settled over everyone like a quiet storm, impossible to ignore. The air was heavy, not just with grief, but with the realization of what had just been spoken. These were not just formalities or routine legal statements. These were the last wishes of Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch who had dedicated her entire life to duty, service, and the unity of her family and country.
Reflecting on these events makes me grateful for the blessings of home and family.
Now, in her absence, her words were more powerful than ever. Andrew's hands, still slightly unsteady, carefully folded the last page of the will. He placed it gently on the table, as if even the paper itself carried the weight of history. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the royal family. His voice was slow and deliberate.
But also having that connectivity in family life, I believe. But they are now being successful in their own right.
Ensuring that every word was absorbed. The Queen's final request was not about wealth, titles, or possessions. It was about something much greater. It was about unity. She had hoped that despite the tensions, disagreements, and wounds of the past, her family could find a way to remain strong together. She wished for them to seek peace instead of conflict, to show resilience in the face of adversity, and to embrace the true meaning of service, not as an obligation, but as a privilege. Her life had been defined by these principles, and in her final message, she urged her family to uphold them. These were not just words meant to be heard, they were meant to be lived. The message struck deep as each of the royal family was lost in their own thoughts and felt the weight of her request. For years, tensions had simmered beneath the surface. Conflicts, personal choices, and public scrutiny had strained relationships within the monarchy.
You see, it's much smaller, isn't it? I mean, it It was the same height.
And yet, at this moment, those divisions felt small compared to the Queen's vision of what they could be. Some sat in silence, processing the enormity of her words. Others looked toward one another as if searching for answers or perhaps the courage to begin the process of healing. No one spoke, but the impact was undeniable. The Queen's voice still carried influence, even from beyond the grave. Charles sat still, his hands folded together. His face was composed, but there was a stiffness in his posture. He had spent his entire life preparing for this role, knowing that one day he would take the throne. Yet even with all that preparation, the reality of it was still overwhelming. His mother had guided him for so many years, setting the example of what it meant to lead with dignity. Now, he was expected to uphold those standards, to carry forward a legacy that had endured for generations. This was challenging. He had expected his transition to be straightforward, but now he realized that his mother had left him with something much greater than just a title.
So close to where my beloved mother, the late Queen, is laid to rest.
She had left him with expectations, a framework that he had not entirely anticipated. He would not have unchecked power. He would have to work within the structure she had put in place, ensuring that the balance she had created remained intact. It was not what he had envisioned, but he had no choice but to accept it. But what weighed on him even more was the division within his own family. The will had reminded him of something he could not ignore, the fractures that had formed over time. His own relationship with his sons, William and Harry, had been tested. His sister Anne, ever the steadfast one, had remained loyal and dependable, but even she had seen the struggles they had faced.
And Queen Elizabeth dedicated this National War Memorial in honor of all those who paid the supreme sacrifice in the Great War.
And now, in the Queen's final words, there was a call for something he wasn't sure was possible: unity. Anne, on the other hand, sat quietly, absorbing every word with deep reflection. She had always been the one who expected little, who worked tirelessly without seeking the spotlight. Her mother had trusted her with Sandringham, and while it was a great honor, it was also a heavy responsibility. But that was the kind of duty Anne had always embraced. She had watched her mother rule with grace, never allowing personal feelings to interfere with the bigger picture. Anne understood that more than anyone. Yet, as she sat there, she could not help but think about the moments they had shared, the quiet afternoons spent riding horses together, the long conversations about tradition, about what it truly meant to serve. The Queen had not been one to express emotions openly, but Anne had always known how much she cared. And now, without her, it was up to them to hold everything together. For Catherine, the realization was just as powerful. The Vladimir tiara was now hers, a symbol of grace and continuity. But more than that, it was a sign of what lay ahead. The Queen had not chosen her lightly. It was a reminder that one day she would be Queen Consort. She had always known it, of course, but now it felt real in a way it never had before. William, too, felt the weight of what had been said. He had known his grandmother as more than just the Queen. She had been his guide and his mentor. From a young age, he had been taught the values of service and duty, and he had always looked up to her strength. But as the words of the will settled in, he realized something else. She had seen the future, had understood that times were changing, and she had left them with the responsibility of shaping what came next. And then there was Harry, who was mentioned twice, despite his absence from the monarchy. The ceremonial sword of King George VI had been entrusted to him, and that decision alone had caused a stir in the room. It was a symbol of honor, of history, yet it had been given to the one who had chosen a different path. Harry had stepped away from the monarchy, seeking a life outside of it, yet his grandmother had still included him in her final wishes. That spoke a lot. For William, it was frustrating. He had remained loyal and had done everything expected of him, yet it felt as though Harry was still being given recognition. For Charles, it was another reminder of the complications within their family. For Anne, it was simply another moment of realization that no matter how much things changed, family ties would always be there, woven into the fabric of their history. And for some, it felt undeserved. He had stepped away, chosen a different life, and yet the Queen had still acknowledged him. It reminded them that, No matter how much distance existed, he was still a part of the family's story. The younger generation had also been given a role to play. Prince George and Princess Charlotte were now heirs to more than just titles. They were inheriting the values and lessons of their great-grandmother, a responsibility that would shape their futures. And even little Louis had been included. However, as the reality of the will settled in, the atmosphere in the room remained tense. There were no arguments, no spoken words, but the emotions were evident. Some were thoughtful, others unsettled. The future was now in their hands, and there was no clear path forward. And at the end of it all, even those who had not been given direct inheritances understood the message. The Queen had left behind more than material wealth. She had left behind a vision, a structure that would define the monarchy moving forward. As the family slowly dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts, one thing was clear. The Queen's will was not just about dividing her possessions. It was about ensuring that her life's work did not end with her. And her reminder of their strong, unbreakable ties was both a comfort and a challenge. Bonds of blood, duty, and history had brought them here. But those ties could only endure if they were nurtured with understanding, forgiveness, and shared purpose. The choice was now theirs. In the end, the final words of Queen Elizabeth II were not just a farewell, but a call to action. And as the room remained in silence, each member of the royal family had to ask themselves if they were ready to answer it. Would they continue on separate paths, allowing past grievances to shape the future? Or would they honor her wishes and find a way forward together? Drop it in the comment section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen, and you will enjoy it.